Welcome back, you guys. This is the Art School Graduates Podcast. My name is Justin Robinson. Today, I have the honor of interviewing and talking to a long time, I would even say family, because we grew up in the same church together, Dana Washington Queen, the talented Dana Washington Queen. How
Thanks.
are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. So, Dana, let's talk about it. Your work, it spans like multiple disciplines. You've gone from film to photography to now you are touching base into becoming a barber. So can you walk us through the moment you realized you could blend all these mediums into your practice?
Yeah, I would say the moment I realized that starting with writing can be, you know, transformed from prose
Mhm.
to, film scripts. I think the moment that really came to me was in a creative writing, creative nonfiction class at Cal State Long Beach, and we had to write 10 pages um, minimum. And I was coming from like poetry, very short form styles of writing. And so I was in this class writing these, longer works. And
Mhm.
around that time, I would say 2014, I had went to the Underground Museum in Los Angeles, and there was a 2-channel projector video installation that an artist by the name of Khalil Joseph had in collaboration with Kendrick Lamar.
Mhm.
And it was Mad City, and this was the first time I had seen video installation and film broken up into a video format. I think in that moment, it dawned on me that my writing can become scripts and um, adopting the poetic style with the cinematic style with just all the symbolic meaning. And I
Mhm.
think from there was when I started thinking about Underbone. And that was the first short film that I made. And that was kind of in a direct response of what I had experienced in this creative nonfiction class and in that video installation, that video art, experimental video was a way for me to incorporate my voice, the writing, the photography, the direction of photography for
Mhm.
cinema and a camera person, and really just try to like think about the video medium as just a form that allows me to just
Mhm.
kind of move freely as
Mhm.
an artist, as a visual artist and sonic
Mhm.
and voice. And it was just in that moment, 2014, where I was like, okay, this is all going to make sense. And I think since becoming a barber, now it's like kind of taking me into the realm of performance and also broadening my documentary practice, because when you're cutting people's hair,
Mhm.
you're talking to them, you're getting to
Right.
know them, you're learning about them through their hair, through their scalp, through the hairstyle they want. And there's so much that you can learn
Mhm.
um, in the dynamic of between a barber and a client. And all of it is kind of just opened me up to a wealth of possibilities with everything that I've done and everything that I can do artistically.
Mm. That's good. Yeah, I saw the same installation, um, the Kendrick Lamar Mad City, and it legitly blew my mind. I was like, why isn't this could be a music video? Like,
Mhm,
I was like, damn, this makes me really miss music videos.
mhm,
But then it came back to me because that was during my MFA I was going to museums, and I think that was when I was like, oh wow, this camera thing is really dope,
mhm.
because I was learning photography during my MFA.
Got
And
you.
so that's why I was able to connect with that. And I just think the black story, I might catch flack for it, but the black story should be told by black people. I I think so, because it's just to be able to allow us to be comfortable with you.
Yeah.
Like that Khalil Joseph, to be able to go into, that's not like a normal hood.
Mhm.
Like that's
Yeah.
not like a normal like street you can walk down. Like you had to allow your people to be comfortable with you.
Mhm.
And I know I might catch some hell for it, but I think so. I'm a little different in that sense, but you know who my mom is, so that should tell you enough.
Oh,
But
yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah, so that should tell you enough right there. But so you were talking about the barbershop and having these conversations. And I know you're working on, you moved from one place and now you're transitioning into another place, but you were very big on the your space being for gender
Mhm.
affirming haircuts and having these organic conversations. Like, how does that reflect in the theme of like otherness in a broader artistic practice for you?
I mean, yeah, it's all about creating spaces, we call them third spaces or subaltern spaces,
Hmm.
spaces that are kind of like outside of, away from what is heteronormative.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, Poetic Shifts the studio, it was essentially gonna be my art studio that was gonna allow me to cut hair out of, and I just thought it would be a good idea to really cater to a specific group of people, in Richmond, Virginia, where I'm at now. A lot of the barbershop, I mean, there's tons of barbershops here,
Hmm.
and there's a few queer run, queer owned spaces, but they're really white. And so it was just like, okay, that's cool, but also what about all the Black queer people that are here, or queer parents that are here,
Hmm.
students, teachers, whoever that are here that might not identify as white
Hmm.
or don't center of white, and so want
Hmm.
to create this space, for people of all genders and expressions to come receive care.
Hmm.
So gender affirming is just, just a way to provide and receive care, and that care is going to help you to feel more in alignment with who you are and how you want to present in the world. And,
Hmm.
just having conversations about like what you did last weekend,
Right.
just kind of just general conversation. But
Hmm.
most times there's artists coming in there. So we talk about art things, and
Hmm.
then it might become a studio visit in a sense, or like some mentorship conversations. And yeah, I just wanted to create that space. And yeah, it was important to me also moving here from
Hmm.
California to use that space as a way to kind of build community and to meet new people.
How's that transition been for you? You've been there. What is this now? 3 years? What is
2 years, coming up on 2
two?
years.
Coming up on two. How's
Yeah.
that transition been from California to Virginia?
Man, it's crazy. It trips me out, like, sometimes when I'm driving down the street and, you just see the overgrown grass and the chain link fence, um, and these kind of things that are kind of emblematic of, like, the
Hmm.
South, and it just kinda just blows my mind. But, we drove here, me and my family drove here from California in a 16 to 20-foot moving truck that was
Wow.
towing another little truck in the back. And it took 5 days. It took 5 days, and just that, I think that period of time, was so, like, healing, because it wasn't just like we have to fly there and then, like, right away,
Hmm.
boots on the ground. It was like we had this, long period of time to get there and then, find ourselves. But the South, the first thing I said to myself when we moved here was, "I moved to the South and I can finally think. I can hear myself think, because time is slow here. Like, you don't have to
Hmm.
work as hard as you do in California or in bigger cities. You don't have to,
Hmm.
bend over backwards to get just the bare minimum."
Hmm.
It was really like recalibrating my mind and how I moved, and slowing down and being like, "You moved here because you wanted a slow life, and
Hmm.
this is what it looks like, and you have to honor that." And so it's been really healing in that way to be here. But the transition, like, is night and day from California. And,
I believe it.
yeah.
I believe it.
But, I have so much more time here to like rest, and I have more time to spend with my family, with my spouse. So it's like, it's good, but it's
That's
also,
good. Yeah,
the,
you have the stereotypical things that come with being in the South, but
mhm,
I think for you to feel grounded, that must feel amazing to feel
mhm,
like you can like when you said like so it's like the noise turned off and you could
mhm,
hear and you can
yep.
think that makes me want to walk outside and go stand in the grass and hug a tree real quick.
Yeah.
It might not be the same thing. It might not be the same kind of effect you get, but man,
Yeah.
that just sounds peaceful. Like it sounds
Mhm,
peace. Like
yeah.
sounds like you have brought yourself to a place of peace. And I just,
Mhm,
man, that's great.
yeah.
I'm super happy for you to be in
Thank
that
you.
space. Um, so something else. I was just wondering about was how you spoke on earlier about underbone. And by far I love that. I remember when you showed it to my photography class because they had to do a video on self. And I remember you showed that identity and spirituality are like central themes, I think, in your work. How
Mhm.
do you approach like the exploration of those topics in that piece? And if people haven't seen it, it is, you have to reach out to her. She is going to show it to you. She put it in films. I loved it because it was like some of the things I saw kind of hit nostalgia for me with the blue robe. And
Mhm.
then see like that took me all the way back to church with the sounds
Mhm.
of holiness. So it was just like
Yeah.
seeing that transition and then you sharing a pic from your grandfather. He was a great man, showing that pic from his memorial service. So I'm
Yeah.
just like, talk on that if you will.
Yeah, identity and spirituality, religion, like, I don't know about you, but I feel like my granddad didn't really talk about those things. Like, he was
Mhm.
really interested in, like, exegeting the Bible and, like, the language
He was a teacher.
aspect. Yeah, like, the language aspect of the Bible.
Mhm,
And so, like, identity and queerness and sexuality, it wasn't really discussed in my family.
mhm.
And so when I'd come out to my mom, like, she was just like, "Okay," and, like, you know? And my dad really responded to it very differently. So, like, I didn't really have a tumultuous
Journey.
journey with queerness,
Mhm,
but definitely with identity because I have a twin sister.
mhm,
And there's, like, this whole, like, need to get identical twins and force identical twins to be identical, like,
mhm.
not being different, and that was kind of jarring to me as a kid, just like, "Wait a minute, like, I can't choose, like, what I wanna do, like, I have to like this person?" And so identity, growing up was definitely tied to just, like, being a twin,
Mhm,
and so a lot of the themes and around queerness and identity kind of start from there, but then the queerness aspect, I don't know, like, I didn't really think about it in Underbone as, like, an issue. It was like, this is existing, and I
mhm,
am in this relationship with this person, and then there's this other aspect of my grandfather, what he represented, and, the church itself. There were kind of always separate things because they weren't necessarily talked about in church or brought together in church,
mhm.
and so there was not really much connection to how I felt about being queer in church because it didn't matter because I could not wear a dress and nobody would say anything to me for a very, very long time, a very, very
Yeah.
long time. And so it wasn't in my mind that queerness is something that is an issue and that other people might have their very difficult relationships with queerness in the church. But with Underbone, I was definitely thinking more about my grandfather and the legacy that he instilled in our family, my family, and what the church meant, and then, like, losing that person and trying to go to other churches after his church and just being like, it doesn't feel the same.
Mhm.
Like, being very, unfortunately, judgmental about, like, the pastors in the pulpit and, like, what they're
How they
saying.
do
Yeah,
things.
just like, "That's not I don't
Hold
know
on,
how about that."
I don't wanna cut you off, but I kid you not, my mom still practices the way your grandfather did communion. She has the book. It's a little white book
That's
with
crazy.
the Total Word Concept Institute on
Oh,
it. Imma
wow.
take a picture of it and send it to you. She still uses that. She still does the 4 verbs. She still breaks the matzah. Like, my mom follows it to a T, and she's brought that practice to her new church, and they're like, "We've never heard of this." She was like, "I sat under one of the best
That's
teachers of the
wild.
word," and she was like, "This is the only way I know it," and she was like, "I'm not saying what you're doing isn't right,
Right.
but let's try this and trust me on this. Like, this is
Yeah.
powerful." And so I didn't want to cut you off, but I had to share
Yeah.
because it was like I knew exactly what you're talking about. Where it's like the way he did it was
Yeah.
it made you think, it made you question, it made you want to go search deeper into it.
Yeah. Yeah, yes. Yeah, and it was just so he was just so powerful in
Hmm.
many people's lives, and so having that loss and trying to make sense of these
Hmm.
experiences of losing him, or in the midst of losing him, having this relationship that was nourishing,
Mhm.
and like kind of having this balance of like this duality of feeling pain, but also feeling, pleasure and feeling cared for. And so, yes, spirituality and religion, I think they kind of split, when my grandfather passed. And then like spirituality started coming into play when I started like seeing, like noticing different numbers, and then, finding the meaning of these numbers, and these
Mhm.
meanings be attached to like my grandfather and my grandmother who I never met.
Mhm.
And, thinking about spirits and ancestors, and how, it doesn't, time doesn't matter, and, place doesn't matter. It's just like how you kind of establish and create and maintain those relationships with,
Mhm.
the folks that we've had relationships with in the physical form and who are no longer here, and kind of maintaining those things. And so it's important, for me to include those things in my work, because they're so central to my everyday being and
Mhm.
moving about the world. And so, yeah, they're always going to show up in the work, because it's just in my
Mm.
daily practice.
So when you, uh, um, I remember you said you worked with your grandfather during a period of time. How was that process for you? Like, how was working with him and being a creative writer? Did any of like his influence cross over into that, like his work habits or his studying, did or just conversations with him?
Yes, I would say research, when I'm researching art
Mhm.
now, I'm always looking for the origin of the word, and,
Mhm.
finding the Greek word
Yeah.
and the Hebrew
Yeah.
terminology, transliterating and all that stuff. When I was working there, no, none of that stuff like crossed. And it's
Mm.
so funny because working for him, I was the administrative assistant. So I printed the bulletins, I put the text in there. And I didn't think of it as creative, the
Mhm.
actual writing part, but designing the, what do they call it? The pamphlets,
Yeah, the layout. It was like
yeah,
the
the
Sunday
layout.
announcements. Yeah.
Yeah, the layout was interesting to me. You're doing it on Word.
Mhm.
That was very interesting to me, but I didn't start making the connections of how working at my granddad's church really was, really informed my video and installation practice. When I worked for my
Mhm.
granddad, I also worked in the media department. And in
Mhm.
the media department, I worked on a computer that was tethered to these 2 monitors
Mhm.
that were in the sanctuary where everyone in the congregation could see. Those monitors were connected to a live feed camera that was in the church, and, you can switch back and forth between my granddad in the pulpit, people in the congregation, and song lyrics, Bible scriptures. And these are kind of like how I kind of work in
Mhm.
video installation, where we're kind of working with 2-channel installation, 2 screens, whether it's a TV monitor or projections,
Mhm.
and all that is based on a computer and starts on the computer. And so I didn't make those connections until I was in grad school. It was like, "Oh my god, like, I was doing this in church." Like, it was like it's the same thing, but, like, in a different context,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
art school. And so I think that was kind of like when I started thinking about, okay, all the different things that I've done in my life, I've done them for a reason.
Got you.
You know what I mean? Like, I was a secretary, and that, like, is central to, like, my organization and
Mhm.
research. Photography is central to, like, everything I do now. Working on those monitors are essential to, like, if I want to install in a gallery space. There's all these kind of connections, but at the time, no, I wasn't thinking about any of this. It was just like, okay, I need to pay my bills and like finish
I've been there, yes.
undergrad and all those things. But yeah, no, I wasn't really thinking about it. But I have this one story where one of the final classes that I took in
Mhm.
undergrad for English was English grammar. And
Mhm.
I was like putting it off because it was just like, I'm so disappointed that I know how to write and use all of these different techniques and tools and
Mhm.
speak, grammar and language, but
Yeah.
not know like how to do it and what they mean.
Mhm.
And the teacher was like this old elderly white guy, and he was like the white man version of my grandfather, the way that he taught, the way that like his whole disposition.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because he, like, took a liking to me, and I
Mhm.
sat in the front row, and he would always say, "Miss Washington, like, it's good to see you." And then, like, the day of the final, he never showed up. He never showed up, and I was just like, "I hope he didn't die," like,
Oh, no.
Like, he reminded me so much of my grandfather because the
Mhm,
way that he taught, and it was just, like, not necessarily easy to pass that class, but it was easy to understand, okay,
mhm,
like, he's going back to the origin of the word and breaking it
mhm,
down, and so it's like, okay, I kinda have some reference of that from the way that my granddad taught, but yeah, some of these connections came later, but some of these were just, like,
mhm.
very much tied to other things and not visual creative art, but the text, the word.
That's good. Do you
Mhm.
ever do you ever just sit down and just reminisce on conversations you've had with him?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
just I just wondered that because he was such like he I feel like he spoke so elegantly, and
Mhm.
it just made you just want to sit and be like, just I don't know, read the back of the instructions of something because he just made it sound so just so like fluid and formal and things like that. Well, that I'm glad you had those experiences because I can
Yeah.
definitely see how it's helped you on this like journey of artist,
Mhm.
creator, um, not doing art in the typical form of like, oh, let me just press record. You're like, nah, this is going to have to look this way. I'm going to incorporate
Mhm.
this. I'm going to have this conversation. It's going to tell multiple stories. And
Yeah.
so I think that's just so dynamic. And
Mhm.
so you have an upcoming project that examines like the personal significance of hair, black hair, and queer communities. Like, can you explain like your own experience as a how a barber and understanding these like signifiers? Can you help break that down for us?
Yeah, these kind of questions, these explorations are very new, very much in the research phases of thinking about hair, black hair that is different from, the hyper feminine and the hyper masculine perspectives of hair and the barbershop and maintenance and relationships between mother and daughter, hair braiding on the floor, or
Mhm,
taking your son for the first time to the barbershop to get his haircut, or
mhm,
all these things are interesting and important. And as someone who is queer and who has had very different experiences with hair and with these relationships and these places, I'm just kind of in the beginning phases of just like finding out about queer stories and queer experiences, from other people,
mhm,
um, because, yeah, I feel like that's missing in some of the literature around hair cutting and hair care and how people wear their hair and the significance of hair, and it means, I feel like gender affirming hair care is the same as a guy getting a haircut and him feeling like, "Oh, I can go to the club." Like, it's all the same. It's all this
yeah.
it's this euphoric feeling.
Mhm,
It's this confidence that you feel better about exuding because you have a fresh haircut, or you have a haircut that, you go from long to short because,
mhm,
maybe your religion said you can never cut your hair,
mhm,
and, this resistance is, "I'm gonna cut my hair short," or, "I have locks and I wanna cut them short," or, "I wanna start my locks." All of these things have different meanings to different people, and I think finding more of those stories from queer people is where I'm starting at. Another place that I'm kind of starting to learn about barbering and hair, barber school, for one, my teacher was a woman, and, we all know the dynamic of
barbershops.
barbershops
Mhm,
and female barbers, or
mhm,
gay, queer, trans, anybody coming into the barbershop that doesn't look like the prototypical male or female. But my teacher was a female barber, and she started in the 90s, and, listening to her experiences and how she got through, um, the struggles of being a woman in the barbershop, and the way that she always spoke in the affirmative, when dealing with customers, and even, speaking to her students. Like, she never talked down to us when we messed up. And so we adopted this language of speaking to each other in the affirmative. And even if we're like messing up a haircut, like, we're still trying to think in the affirmative. Um, because at the end of the day, like, the barbershop experience is a transaction.
mhm,
And hair, people are coming in with very specific desires of what they want the hair to look like. And, based on the outcome of what the barber is capable of doing, It's just so much that is beyond hair texture and the significance of hair. I think a lot about the barber performance and being someone who has no prior knowledge of hair cutting. I've never gone to school before the time I went to school to cut hair, with a purpose and a meaning. And so, like, I have all this like fear and second guessing hesitation around hair cutting because I'm just like, oh my God, like it's so easy to mess up. And, trying to learn to have self-compassion. But the barber's performance is it's just so amazing. It's like a sculptor, it's like a painter, it's like a jazz musician, it's like a basketball player. There's like these methods and techniques that you learn and that you continue to practice, and you put your own spin on it, and you have your own individual style based on how you curve the line of your fade or like whatever. And those things are interesting to me, specifically because I feel like it's just like pure creativity, and you have to create in the moment. Because barbering is also about time. Like, people want to cut hair in 20 or 30 minutes and be out because you want to make at least $100 an hour. And so there's so much to learn about the craft and about doing, and like your body and your mind being in alignment so that you can perform these haircuts. And it's just opening me up to so much as an artist and as a person, and to just being freer and less rigid, and just being more open. And hair is so expansive. It's
Yeah,
so
it is. I remember in one of your videos, I think you documented when you cut your locks.
expansive.
Is that where you first started, or has this was already a seed planted and you were just trying to lay out how it was going to look?
I never imagined myself being a barber. I never imagined myself going to barber school. I never imagined that being a profession. And that happened after finishing graduate school in 2020 when the pandemic happened. And I was maybe 2 years, 3 years into unemployment because it was
Wow.
just so difficult to find work as a visual art person, and
Yes, it
how
is.
impacted and difficult it is to just, be an adjunct or to even just get an interview in, academia as a art person. And so, like, for practical reasons, I went to barber school to, learn a skill set and a craft to be able to leave that program to make money, when I hit the ground running. My relationship to hair from a young child was, I hate my hair. Like, I don't want hair. I want to cut it off. Like, I can't do it. It's too hard. The first
Mhm.
time I touched a pair of clippers, these clippers were supposed to be broken and they weren't. And I mowed through my hair.
Oh,
Um, Kid you not, like 12, 13 years old, and like kind of just being like, oh well. Like, being like kind of like empowered by it.
yeah.
And having to tell my mom, like, "Mom, I cut my hair," and her being like, "Oh my gosh," and brushing
Trying
a
to make it cover
swoop,
it.
a huge swoop, and I was just like, "I don't care." Like, I just don't care.
Mhm.
But I started wearing hats a lot when I was a kid after that.
Mhm.
But hair, I was always just like, hair is always gonna grow back until, like, you're
Mhm.
old, right? And you start going bald. And so I was always just like okay with letting go of my hair. And so when I cut my hair in current state of everything,
Mhm.
I had grown locks for 6 years, and I cut them the year after my grandfather passed. On the day of his passing, I cut my locks off, and was just like new beginnings, fresh start. And kind of like this was kind of like the next step, the next part of life
Mhm.
without this cornerstone in my family, and choosing to not go to church, and like building practices on Sunday that could fill that place. And a lot of it was built around washing my hair, redoing my locks. And so kind of like making these connections, but to the spiritual, I guess, and to the personal. But the work, I mean, not necessarily the work, but like the profession now, I had no idea that I would be a barber, but I'm not surprised that it's something that's, tangible, and that,
Mhm.
I have to do something with my body.
I
Yeah.
see that. So I know you touched on literally you painted the most. I'm a visual guy. So I saw that whole thing of the artistry of how a barber works. And so, like, how do you see the role of barbering evolving now that you're stepping into it with more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Affirming. Because most barbershops, I grew up in them, I went to them, they're not very affirming. The
Mhm.
music isn't, the conversation isn't, sometimes what's on TV isn't. So how do you see the role of barbering evolving now that you're going to be in this space?
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I feel like being in a barber shop is gonna be significantly different from being in a private studio where I control all the variables in that space and that people are coming into a space that I curated or I made feel good or smell nice. In the
Mhm,
barbershop that I'm moving to, there's gonna be 4 chairs, and the person that runs this barbershop is a Black queer elder.
mhm,
And so that, in a sense, for me, is gonna be a safe space for me to be there,
mhm,
and having this elder be a mentor to me as a barber. They call it a junior barber, someone who has worked less than 1 or 2 years. That dynamic I'm gonna be leaning into because, I've heard the horror stories about being in a barbershop. I've heard the horror stories about getting a haircut or being
mhm,
a queer Black or a queer feminine or trans barber, in the shop, and so I'm really looking forward to kinda being welcome in this space and kind of pushing more towards the things that feel affirming to me so that I can give affirming care to other people that come into
yeah,
my chair in this
mhm,
new space. Yeah, I'm still thinking it through in terms of my workstation is like
mhm,
between is in the middle, I guess, of the 4, and so
mhm,
gonna try to figure out how to make my station, reflect who I am as a
mhm.
person, whether that's like, I don't know, pictures that I put around it or things that I clip on the mirror to suggest that, "Oh, you're safe here, you can come here, I'm that type of
Mhm.
barber." Um, in a way that, makes other people feel comfortable and not like, pushing that on folks, but just kind of
Gotcha.
certain things that people can
Mhm.
identify. This is a queer space, it's a queer chair.
So, is your ultimate goal to have like a your own barbershop, you would say? Or
I
do
don't know
you
if I'm
still want it to be barber and art gallery type vibes like you kind of described?
I think that my ultimate goal would be to it be a slash space, like
Mhm,
my studio and barber shop. But yeah, that's all dependent on like my family. My spouse is an artist too, and so wanting
mhm.
to, think about that. But like one of my goals, my, kind of smaller goal is to be a barber for someone in the WNBA.
Mm,
To cut for some, national
yeah,
championship, college, I don't care, college,
yeah.
professional basketball. I think that would be amazing.
So I just thought of this right now. Your skill set with documenting and telling these stories. Would you ever tap into the aspect of social media to help further along this? Would you include social media into your practice? That I think because in my head, like now when you go on social media, you see barbers that got microphones on their wrists. You can hear them cutting. You can see them doing the scalp.
It's
Like they're doing a
documentary.
lot. Yeah. So,
It's literally documentary.
but yours is, I feel like yours would be a little bit different
Oh, yeah.
visually.
Yeah.
So how do you see social media playing that role to help grow in your practice?
Yeah, I think about social media a lot, and I
Mm.
have a very bad relationship with social media 'cause I'm, like, not really on it
Uh-huh.
sometimes. But when I first started making art, I shared my work on social media, like Instagram and Tumblr and Vimeo. Those were places that I put my work.
Mhm,
I put my videos, photography, music, spoken word, collages, everything. I put all of those things on social media because it was is accessible. I wanted to make always wanted to make my work accessible to people.
mhm,
And so I think I'm going back to thinking about that practice and sharing my work on social media and through, my personal website,
mhm,
as a place to start because I haven't really filmed that much in the last 3, 4 years in I guess in a way that I was filming when I first started,
mhm,
the more cinematic, poetic, kind of everyday, you know, films, videos
mhm.
that I
Yeah.
created, and I think because of barbering has opened me up so much, I've kind of found my way back around to going back to that. So, yeah, barbering, I think you need social media now, in a sense, and for businesses. Word of mouth is always great, but I think social media is a way to promote yourself and to
Hmm.
show your abilities through the image.
Right.
Um, I do envision myself making short films that incorporate hair, that
Mhm.
incorporate, all the things that I've already been working through, but kind of using hair, as a vehicle in a sense to kind
Mhm.
of talk about larger themes of Black life and, um, just the everyday things that in conversations that happen around hair and in those spaces.
Mm.
Yeah, social media is important. It's not ideal, but I think, how young people think and how young people communicate, social media is so important to
Mm.
kind of, keep those connections because, yeah, like, it's a form of communication.
Yeah.
I think it's
Okay.
essential to a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. It very much is. I'm horrible because I am Mr. Just like, oh, let me just shoot this person a DM. And I'm like, they're probably busy. Let me do like, I am king of just hopping in, sending messages to friends and people like that. Cause it's like, I'm the worst texter. So but I'm on social. So it's just like, oh, let me just
Yeah,
send them. And I'm like, that could have been a text message. Like,
yeah. It
so
could've.
yeah, I'm king of that. But you touched on the aspect of moving into this barbershop and having a mentor. So, was that something you felt you desperately needed? Was that community aspect, or was it more of you wanting to grow in the field?
It was twofold,
Mhm.
twofold. Um, yeah, I feel like I needed a mentor because I'm going into territory that I've never been through. I've never, been a professional barber before. I don't know what this world is like, and who better to try to find a mentor in is someone who is an elder who is Black,
Mhm.
and it's you see that they've made barbering has made it possible for them to, live and succeed and have
Mhm.
these other ways of being and living. And so that was an example for me, like, okay, like this person is a barber, I can do this,
Mhm.
but also do all these other things that make me happy and bring me joy, like art. But yeah, and also just leaving barber school and passing the exams, I just felt like I wasn't ready. Like
Mhm.
I don't have the skill set that I feel like I think I should at this point.
Yeah.
And your learning is only as good as your teacher. Your
Mhm.
education is only as good as your teacher. And I'm always trying to be a student to learn something because there's always other ways to do something and other ways to think
Mhm.
and to make meaning from. And so this mentor was something that I wanted to further become a part of the community as someone who is new, but also just my skill set.
Mhm.
I'm a perfectionist and I want to, do the best and be the best,
Mhm.
in everything possible. So this was like, a move that was strategic, but also like to be a part of this community.
Okay. Yeah, I was very curious, like the mentorship, because it's like I feel like you went from being very like, because when you're in your studio, it's a very isolating feeling, but it's also a freeing feeling
Yep.
because it's like you set the rules, you set the time, you set the guidelines, but it's like
Mhm.
now you're going into where you have to follow someone else's time and guidelines. But I think mentorship is huge. Like
Oh, yeah.
I have a mentor. I have like a couple because it's like I I have a spiritual mentor, I have an artist mentor. It's just like I have to have somebody that I don't know everything. Like
Right.
I'm damn near about to be 40. I still don't know everything. So
Yeah.
it's like I'm struggling to figure it out. So I'm like, man, I gotta have a mentor to help guide me on this journey of life. And I
Yeah.
think that's really dope.
Yeah.
So I noticed you had excuse me. I noticed you have like a new piece that was up. It's in resume at the point of
Oh, yeah.
interruption.
Resume at the point of
Oh, I'm
interruption.
sorry. I said resume. I'm thinking resume at the point of interruption.
Yeah.
Explain that. That was a very it showcased different creators in it. And then it just seemed like they were talking about themes of gender, difference, constraints, freedom.
Mhm.
And I just was like, wow, this was different. Like I wasn't turned off by it at all, but I was very much when I watched it, I was just like I watched it probably 3 times, being honest with you. Just
Wow.
so I can give each person like their fair
Yeah.
shot of like explaining their position, their story, their view, their expression. So share with us like your experience that you shared within that documentary.
Yeah, Resume at the Point of Interruption was first, it was a solo exhibition at the
Mhm,
ICA in here, Virginia Commonwealth University. It was an exhibition that kind of used basketball to talk about themes
mhm,
and concept and ideas around the Black sporting body, the Black laboring body in sports, and how the sports entertainment aspect utilizes, different camera
mhm,
technologies from that derive from military complex, from like motion sensor, motion capture cameras, and thinking about how these cameras are put in a different context in arenas to capture live basketball, let's just say
mhm,
basketball. And so thinking about camera technologies and the history of Virginia, in American enslavement and the Black laboring body and, laboring in these different fields of the land, I should say, and kind of thinking about basketball to work through these ideas about body and knowledge and the technologies and modalities that we use to kind of get ourselves through.
mhm,
And so the documentary was a part of that exhibition of the same title, Resume at the Point of Interruption, in which I interviewed three different individuals, a midwife, a musician, and a teacher of Tai Chi, and kind of talking to them about their experiences in America and just
mhm,
with their Black bodies and like in the fields that they work in. And so the healthcare sector with midwifery, you think about the body, the Black
mhm,
female, the Black birthing body, and all the things that are tied to the safety around childbearing and
mhm,
labor, and migration in my friend's story, who is a musician and his family moving from St. Thomas to California, and all the different modalities of music for him. And the Tai Chi, Inpu, the Tai Chi teacher, we were talking about, she's kind of just like the overall idea of improvisation and
mhm,
the way that our bodies respond to certain interactions and stimuli. And so kind of using all these different stories to talk about the way that the Black body moves and how Black people have persevered in all these various different ways. And my portion of the film was about my experience with testosterone
mhm,
and wanting to think about, is this something that I want a part of my life? So let me just try it, because in California you can access these things because it's literally gender affirming care
mhm,
in the most, I don't know, like basic sense.
mhm,
And so I took testosterone for 6 months and, was thinking about my body changing and thinking about my relationship to my body and documenting it with photographs, um, and kind of contrasting these ideas of wanting to be in alignment with my body, but also getting other people to think about what it might be like for them to not feel in alignment with their own
mhm,
body, right?
mhm,
Getting people to kind of like think outside of themselves and their judgments, I think was the most important purpose of this piece, is bringing forth the humanity
mhm,
and compassion that we should have for everyone and each other. And that's kind of like the basis of that. It's kind of like hard to explain. It's very experimental,
mhm.
but yeah, it definitely was a joy working with all of these different people and holding space with all these different people. And we did that during COVID, and so it was even more special because yeah, people are really afraid of
Mhm,
illness and sickness and the after effects of that. So it was really
mhm.
special to make that work and to exhibit it at a large scale.
So, did you ever find it to be do you ever deal with that? I don't want to, it's not imposter syndrome. Do you ever feel like intimidated showing like very personal, like intimate aspects of you in your own film? With you experimenting with that, I was like, wow, that's kind of like, that's a very personal,
Mhm.
can't get the word out, personal thing to go through and
Mhm.
share with the whole world. Like, do you ever feel like my God, how's this going to take? Or is it more of, I'm creating this, I need to tell this story, and I'm going to share it?
I mean, I kind of just think about, what it's like for people who are pregnant to have their body change over a period of time, whether it's by choice or whether it's not by choice, right? Thinking about the body changing over time,
Mhm.
and thinking about my body changing over time, whether it's a choice or not a choice. I kind of thought about it in that sense that it's personal, but it's not that personal because
Mhm.
we're thinking about the change of the body, and everybody's body changes.
Mm.
Is changing, from when we're born to when we
Mhm.
die.
Right.
And so I think it might be different because a lot of people aren't sharing those things, but I think there are a lot of people on social media sharing those stories.
Okay.
I think that, um, and what does that say to the number of queer trans individuals in art who are making stories about that, who feel safe to make stories about that, who
Mhm.
are not encouraged to make stories about that or to
Mhm.
not share that, but you never know who might see that and who that might change and impact, um,
Mm.
and transform. And that's what I think of. I don't really think about, oh, I'm putting myself out there. I'm like, maybe this is going to change somebody's life in the sense
Mhm.
that it might make them think differently about how they feel about trans people or queer people or
Mhm.
non-binary people, or how they even feel about themselves if they are too wrestling with these big questions of who am I? Who do I
Mhm.
want to be? But yeah, I just think that the art world, the art space is just another space. Like these
Mhm.
conversations are also happening in living rooms, in phone conversations. It's just a larger
Mm.
context and an exhibition.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I wondered that when I was watching, because I was like, I wonder if this is something intimate that she felt kind of like a conflict, but now hearing it, it makes sense because it's like you want people to know you are okay doing this.
Oh
You
yeah.
are perfectly fine doing this. There's nothing wrong doing this. This is how you're going to find who you are and how you can be
Yeah.
comfortable in your skin. So, yeah, that thank you for explaining that. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. That was very helpful for me. So you also mentioned in the documentary that there's not always a clear blueprint to imagining freedom. What does
Mhm.
that mean? Can you expound on that?
Becoming a barber,
Mm.
going to school, being college educated, doing all the right things that, your parents told you to do, your grandparents told you to do, you didn't get in trouble, and you identify as queer and you move to the South and you do all these things that, on paper it looks like things should work out.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, they're just like, no. And so there's no
Mm.
blueprint. So you got to figure out and find innovative and new ways and, hard ways and make tough decisions to make a life for yourself.
Mhm.
I think moving here to Richmond has been all about making a life for myself and for my family
Mhm.
in a place where we know the constraints and the constrictions through law, through the segregated cities.
Mhm.
And we know that there's a big um, issue with poverty, with class.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, finding the different ways to not, be trapped in those things. And there's no blueprint. It's just like just trying to make the best decisions. It's just kind of hard to explain. It's just kind of
Mhm.
following your intuition and following um, your ancestors and,
Mhm.
the logical things that are in front of you and not overthinking. And
Mhm.
it's just kind of like being present because there is no blueprint. So you have to become aware of all the things that might be communicating things to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no blueprint. Like, I'm a teacher, I'm an adjunct,
Mhm.
and some of my students are asking, how do you make a career in the art world? And it's just like, I can't tell you. There's no one way to do it.
There's
And
no
my way
one
was
right way
like,
to do it.
yeah, like my way was just I feel like I just stumbled upon it. Like, I
Mhm.
was never thinking I'm gonna be a professional artist. It was just like, "Oh, I went to school, and this is kind of what happened as I kept going."
Mm.
But, it's just I think the blueprint, I think I feel like it's all about knowing when to make a change,
Mhm.
knowing when to turn left or turn right or, like, really think about the crossroads. I
Mhm.
think it's just all about paying attention to what you need and what your body
Mm.
needs and what your family
Mhm.
needs and what's the best decision that accounts for everyone in your house. And I guess those are kind of the unwritten things that you kind of just have to make a decision on. And that's like the best way that I can explain it, that there's no
No,
blueprint. So
that's
you kind of
good.
have to deviate. Like, I can't take advice from my dad because he's a man.
Hmm.
He has, access to certain spaces because he's a man.
Hmm.
And then, I can only take so much from my mom because I present sometimes masculine or
Hmm.
androgynous. So it's going to be a very different response to how people engage with me. So there's always
Hmm.
like just paying attention and being aware of everything to make the decisions, to make the choices in which direction to go.
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful in understanding that, because I kind of took a step back and I was just like, I've never imagined it, but once you broke it down how you did, with like, you did everything right, didn't go to jail. You're not out there in the streets wilding. You went to school, you got 3 degrees, and it's like things didn't turn out that way. So
Mhm.
it's that in life, learning to pivot
Mhm.
can also be very helpful, but you have to pivot correctly. Like you broke it down, understanding your aunts, listening to the ancestors, praying about it, talking to people, having these mentors to guide you on this journey
Yep. Yep.
is definitely a great way to reimagine freedom, because
Yes.
we've been taught freedom is monetary. You got to have the
Yeah.
$100 million contract and you'll be straight, and it's like, no. No,
Yeah.
that's not gonna work.
No.
But I thank you for explaining that. That made me reimagine freedom and understand that term
Yeah.
differently now. So you mentioned you are an educator. So knowing the difficulties in art, in fine art, and art practices, what advice do you give emerging artists, to push those boundary in their mediums and help them understand, like, hey, even if this doesn't pan out, don't give up on it. So like, what advice do you give them?
In one of my classes, we had a really great conversation about what happens after undergrad.
Mhm.
And a lot of the students in my class are photographer. Well, essentially the class is broken up between photographers, students who are photography majors,
Mhm.
and students who are video film majors.
Mhm.
And one of the students talked about them being a photographer and how sometimes the different industries of photography might be looked down upon than others. So for
Mhm.
instance, we were talking about like photography in the gallery art world context versus being a wedding photographer. And
Mhm.
this student was like, I don't have a problem being a wedding photographer. Like, I want to pay my bills.
Right.
And so I was just like, yes,
Mhm.
like that is the most logical thing that I would tell you, is
Mhm.
that don't think that being a wedding photographer is any less than being a photographer that's, exhibiting in a gallery space. Like, you
Mhm.
really have to use your art and your work and the things that you're able to do, your crafts, your
Mhm.
photography, video,
Mhm.
sound recording, sound engineering. All of these things are jobs that
Mhm.
people will pay for, that you can offer to people,
Mhm.
to balance out your, pursuit of whatever your goal is as an artist.
Mhm.
I can't say that I wish I have, went to barber school sooner, but I got here when I got here, and now I have this tool, this craft, this acquired skill set that no one can take away from me,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I'm always gonna be able to feed myself. I'm always gonna be able to feed my family. And I've been kind of communicating those needs to, my students when thinking about, what happens after school, what happens after grad school. It's
Mhm.
making sure that you can make a living and not relying solely on getting a fellowship or getting a grant or getting into a residency. It's like, there's very material consequences,
Mhm.
for artists who cannot maintain, and art money is not sustainable,
No.
for the average artist. It's
Mhm.
not sustainable. And so it's I've been telling them it's important to have something else that you're going to do, that you're doing, that is going to help balance, you know, the extreme of,
Yeah.
you're gonna be a juggling artist, or you're gonna be an artist that, is well adjusted, because you're not relying on this one thing to
Mhm.
pay your bills. It's all about, just being clear with him. Like, I'm a barber because I don't wanna be a professional artist. Like, it's just not, I don't wanna live that way.
Yeah. It's a
You
struggle.
Yeah, I have
It
kids in the house, like, it's
it's a
different.
Yeah, you have more than you to take care of now.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I had to explain that to my students. They're like, "So why are you a teacher?" And I was like, "I
Mhm.
have bills to pay. I got student
Yeah.
loans to take care of." Like it's I still do my art, but I this job allows me to still chase my passion.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what it does. This
Mhm.
job, I don't look at this job as my passion, like I'm gonna die on this hill. It's like, no, I'm going to use this to fund this
Absolutely.
to the
Absolutely.
point where my passion is actually paying me more than what this job is doing.
Absolutely. Yep.
So
That's it's the balance.
it's the balance.
It's the
And
balance.
I think this generation sees how quick everything happens on social media, and then they realize, oh, I can do that. And then once they get into it, they realize like, oh no,
It
I
takes
can't
time.
do that.
It takes time.
It is takes time, and there's
Yeah.
no machine behind you when you're doing it independently.
No, no,
Yeah.
no.
So we're going to be wrapping this up in a few, but I want to touch on your one showcase you have out here in LA. It's LACMA's Insurgent Sisters Showcase. Can you share with us what that's about?
So I actually don't know anything about it. So
Really?
yeah. So I was asked to well, I know a little bit about it. I
Uh-huh.
wasn't there. It was a one-day screening, a
Hmm.
one-day screening event that showed films from filmmakers from the LA Rebellion,
Hmm.
LA Rebellion. But we're a group of filmmakers in the 60s and the 70s and 80s who were at UCLA who created a form of cinema, Black cinema, indigenous cinema that countered mainstream representations of Black folks and things of that nature. And this film screening highlighted the Black women, queer,
Hmm.
non-binary filmmakers of that time, but also those who are contemporary artists, new younger artists, and how we're all in conversation with one another, and how we're pushing the conventions of film and cinema
Hmm.
and narrative, editing, sound, music, all these different things. But I wasn't able to go because, of course, I'm in Richmond.
Yeah.
But I believe that it was probably an amazing event to being in that
Okay.
space, and that's something that I do miss.
Hmm.
Being out here is that there's still trying to find the Black artists and the cinema
Hmm.
folks and all these different people that, you can be in conversation with and in community with. But it was nice to be, included in that screening, all the way out here and that the work is still resonating back home. Yeah, that feels good. But yeah, it feels good to be included as someone who is non-binary, as somebody who, is not always about, hyper feminine and
Hmm.
the Black women, but also just about like what about those who just don't, identify as that and,
Hmm.
not be lumped in or excluded. But
Right.
I feel, good to be included in that. My section of resume at the point of interruption was included in that to kind of give a different perspective of, filmmaking and video and
Mhm.
life. So that feels good.
That's good. That's good. Well, before we get up out of here, I have one question for you. Looking at your journey you've taken from blending art, barbering, exploring themes of identity, spirituality, and otherness, how do you hope your work and legacy will be remembered in the worlds you've touched and the paths you crossed?
I honestly feel like the career that I've started with, I think all of that work is just the beginning in a sense, because I feel now I've been going back to writing and writing short stories and scripting out films and getting back to the way that I initially started, which was like in cinema and being very invested in cinema.
Mhm.
I think that the work that I'm formulating now and hope to produce in the next, 5 to 10 years, like I hope that this work shows a progression in someone's life, my life, and how I am now interested and focused on Black family, Black
Mhm.
queer family, and you kind of like this next chapter of life that is beyond the self, that is beyond just my perspective, but that
Mhm.
includes relationships between lovers, relationships between children, and relationships to a place. And so I hope that, all the work that I make up until, like, I'm no longer making, I hope that it just creates a nice chart, a nice, map of just Black experiences over time. I think that
Mhm,
is just all that I'm really interested in
mhm,
creating, and I think now it's more important for me to be clear and make the stories legible and kind of move away from experimentation,
mhm,
in the sense of it just being like collage, but thinking more about narrative and time and duration and developing these relationships and these thoughts and
mhm.
themes into, full-fledged stories, and so I'm really excited to, to enter into this next chapter, and hopefully this work is just nourishing to someone someday,
Mhm.
and that it just helps folks.
Thank you for sharing that. So I want to ask you this. What word of advice do you have for someone that may be struggling with identity, struggling with not knowing who they are, not understanding why they're feeling this? What words of encouragement can you give them?
Hmm. It's kinda hard to say how to do this, but I think it's important to find the true inner voice that is yours. Like,
Mhm,
find that deep inside you that's, like, buried away behind, all the different traumatic experiences and, these things that kind of have overshadowed our internal voice that we need to actually be seeking.
mhm,
I think that that is the voice that has helped me kind of get out of dark places and find inner peace, is like
mhm,
just kind of returning back to myself and turning inward. And I think that's the only way, is just, going through yourself and, just kind of unlocking all the locks that you and other people, put on you. And, as you start unlocking those locks, the more comfortable you'll be in your body and the more harmony that you'll have with yourself. And I think that it's important just to be in harmony and find harmony in all that you do and in
mhm.
all the places that you find yourself, and just finding the harmony and not focusing only on like the bad.
Yeah,
That's what I
that's
would say.
good. That's
Yeah.
very good. Thank you for that. Well, you
Mhm.
guys, that is the end of our podcast. My name is Justin Robinson. I have the great Dana Washington Queen with us, and thank you guys for listening. Peace.
Thank you.